My journey into veganism started, it's hard to point an exact moment that it began. I want to say I was brought up in a plant-based household to start. My mother very rarely ever cooked with meat. She always said that she hated the sight of blood. And also she was a single mom, so eating a plant-based diet was also an economical choice for us. But, I think that if I had to pinpoint a moment where my vegan journey actually started, I'd say that it started when I was on a school field trip to the Royal Winter Fair in Toronto, and it's like a big agricultural fair that happens here in Toronto yearly. And my mom sent me with $40 in my pocket, and I was excited to go because I was excited. I'd never been to this fair before, and I didn't know what it was all about. I was about 12 years old. And I remember when we went with the school, we were walking around, and I remember seeing that at this fair, the names of the different animals that they had at this fair, they were named differently. So specifically, the cows were named beef, the pigs were named pork. And I noticed how sort of strange it was that, we were walking by these animals that as a child, I looked at them and they were beautiful, they were majestic. And I'd walk by them and you'd see all these brochures at the fair talking about how succulent their meat was and how, talking about them very much as a product instead as a living being. And I remember as a child looking at that and instinctively thinking, this feels strange. It feels weird. And I passed by, there was one moment I specifically remember, I passed by the pig section, which was labeled pork, and there was a mother pig in what I now know to be a gestation crate, and she had all of her little piglets jammed in there with her. And I remember seeing them, and they could barely move. And as a child, they reminded me of dogs, in fact. Their eyes were human. They had emotions and they were scared, and I could see that. And the people at the fair, all these families were gathered around this crate and they were banging on this crate. There was just this atmosphere of sort of, it felt like a circus in a way, all these people crowding around this crate. And I remember I pulled out the $40 that my mom had given me, and I sort of naively walked up to a farmer who was in that section, and I said, look, I don't know how to get them out of this, and I don't know how much they are. I don't know if I can get them or buy them or what I can do, but please just take the money I have, and can I get one of them out of here or all of them out of here, because I just want to get them out of this environment because it looked horrible. And they laughed at me, the farmer kind of laughed, because that's not what you can do. And I remember walking away from that experience thinking, oh my gosh, that felt wrong. That felt very wrong. And yet cognitive dissonance kicked in, and I went back to my home. And as I said, we were primarily plant-based. We didn't eat a great deal of meat, but I did still continue to eat meat from time to time. And then fast forward to my 20s, I saw a film called Dominion, which, I think it's very interesting that so many, I've read studies on the various tools that actually cause people to become vegan, and documentaries is, up there, definitely in the top 3. And I saw this documentary, and Dominion talks about the state of big agriculture in Australia, and it shows the practices at place and what they do. And once I saw that documentary, I couldn't unsee it. And that was my moment where I said to myself, okay, no more meat in my diet. No more supporting this industry, no more putting money in the pockets of these industries that are intentionally hiding practices that they know are wrong, that they know that if more people knew what was going on, people would definitely not support it, but they're intentionally trying to hide it through, especially, as I said, when you go to a place like the Royal Winter Fair, they try to hide it through very specific language and through desensitization of the animals. And so when I saw Dominion, that was my moment where I said no more meat. And then a really good friend of mine later pointed out the very close connection between the meat industry and the dairy industry, and the fact that the two are so closely intertwined. And once I saw that, that was my moment where I said, okay, enough is enough. And so I started looking into ways to not only not support that industry, but use my voice to fight for the voiceless and the people the souls that cannot raise the alarm themselves. And so, yeah, it started, I want to say, in my 20s, vegetarianism, and then sort of in my later 20s into veganism. But that's how it happened for me.
And what did kind of activism look like for you? You mentioned wanting to use your voice. What did that look like? How did you show up in that kind of space? Initially,
I started. It was very surprising, actually. It took me by surprise. I signed up for. It was a friend. It was a friend, actually, that brought me into the activism space. I had seen people doing activism, and I'd always very much admired the fact that they raised their voices. But somehow I always felt a little bit of sort of imposter syndrome. I felt like I didn't belong there, or like, who am I? Who am I to talk about this subject matter, or even try to talk about it with people, because I don't know it enough. And I was in my sort of mid-20s, and I did an acting class, actually, of all things. I signed up for an acting class, nothing to do with activism whatsoever. And I met Vicky Lanola, who is the executive producer of the Vegan Fashion Show. And she is an activist. She's a model. She's a media powerhouse as well. But, you know, high up there is the fact that she uses her voice and her influence to fight for the animals. And I remember, you know, we connected in this acting class, had nothing to do with veganism. And ironically, having gotten to know each other a little bit better, we realized that we had this connection, this love of the animals together. And I remember she said to me, if you're ever interested in doing something, like if you're ever interested in joining me for a protest, for a demonstration, for a vigil, let me know. And honestly, it was just her opening that door to me and letting me know that I was welcome that made me feel like I could join. And honestly, once I started, I started doing demonstrations to help her with, she does work for PETA, so she does a lot of sort of anti-fur demonstrations. Pardon me. And we've done several vigils with the Save movement as well in Toronto for Cow Save, Pig Save, and Chicken Save. And I honestly don't even know why it took me so long, because those communities are so welcoming and so inclusive. And the only thing I wish I had have done is done it sooner. So that's how that started for me. And to this day, they are some of the most inclusive, lovely, empowering people that I've met, the people that I've met at these demonstrations.
Prior to that, had you gone vegan kind of on your own, or were you did you already have a kind of set community?
I went vegan on my own initially. I want to say, you know, the vegetarianism definitely was on my own. It was after I saw Dominion, and it was a lot harder to do it on my own, because I've had a lot of resources shared with me since I've had this community that I didn't initially know before. But when I was in my early vegan days, I did start it on my own, and it took a lot of just doing a lot of reading. I did a great deal of reading about the lifestyle, largely figuring out a diet, because I think when you are a vegan, you do have to reassess what you're eating and how you get sort of where before, if you were a primary living on a meat-based diet, you had a certain way of getting your protein. Whereas when you are on a plant-based diet, it is 100% possible to live a healthy, protein-filled life. You just have to do the research to understand what that looks like and what you need to be putting in your diet to do that. So there was that adjustment period for me, which I think a lot of vegans go through as well. And then on the activism side, I did a lot of reading just to understand what this industry is, to dig a little deeper, to understand the practices at play, but also to understand the wording associated with what's happening, so that I can, when I do a demonstration or when I do a podcast or when I do speak up at, like, whether it's the Vegan Fashion Show or events, I can use the right terminology that does A, get people interested, and B, also holds industries accountable. So for sure, like, I mean, I did have to there was a bit of an adjustment period when I did begin, and it was initially by myself.
And what's the sort of area where you're at? Have you always been in Toronto? Was it kind of, I imagine, being a fairly big cosmopolitan city, it was probably pretty vegan friendly. Is that the case?
So I have always been based in Toronto. I'm a Toronto-based actress. So I want to say, it's relative. We do have a fantastic vegan community. We do have a number of vegan restaurants, and I really felt it when, like, not to compare, because I am in a very busy urban center. If you use, I want to say it's Happy Frog, I believe is the name of the app. But if you go in and you use any of these apps that tell you where your local, vegan food might be, in Toronto, you have 300, 400, 500 restaurants that pop up. There's so many options, different styles of cooking. We do have fantastic vegan food here in Toronto. That being said, I am extraordinarily envious of those in the UK, because whenever I've been able to travel to the UK, I feel like there's been a lot of early adoption happening in the UK of vegan food versus, in Toronto, it's taken. If you go to vegan restaurants, you can have incredible food. I feel like if you go to sort of other restaurants that are not necessarily vegan specific, to get vegan options, there may be one or two, but it's very limited, and often they will feel sort of like leftover ingredients that they've had to, essentially just take the protein out of and then call it vegan. So that's definitely a little bit of a challenge here in Toronto. I can't speak for other Canadian cities, but that's sort of one of the things I've noticed. But we do have phenomenal vegan restaurants if you seek them out and if you look for vegan specific.
Yeah. Have you seen a step change? Since you started your vegan journey to now, are things rapidly improving?
Yes, considerably. I want to say, if you consider, and I'm thinking now even about like the grocery stores like 5 years ago. If I think about the grocery store 5 years ago and I'm walking around, if you go to the alternative milk section, you may have seen, maybe 2 or 3 different alternative kinds of milk, which would not have been refrigerated. And they would have been sort of to the side on like a side aisle, and you'd have to probably ask where they were. Whereas nowadays, at any local grocery store, if you go to the alternative cheese-based aisle or the alternative milk-based aisle, you're going to see a whole plethora of options. And what always delights me is I keep seeing that the dairy gets smaller and smaller and smaller as these other alternatives keep expanding and coming in. And I am hopeful that as younger generations, especially like Gen Z, the more that they understand and embrace the fact that our planet needs this, the animals need this, our future needs this, future generations need us to make changes, I'm hopeful that we're going to see an increase even further in seeing these other alternatives take precedence. And I've seen the plant-based treaty in the United Kingdom is hugely popular, and I'm seeing so many universities. That's why I'm so envious of the UK. I'm seeing whole universities transition to plant-based menus, which is incredible. Like, incredible. You guys are leading the charge, which is so important.
Yeah, there's at least 3, I want to say now, universities. There's a couple of councils that have gone fully vegan, so at every council meeting and so on. So yeah, it's sort
fantastic.
Of working its way into these different areas. And like you, I'm of the mind that sort of places like universities, younger generations, etc., are forcing more of a substantive change than perhaps, I make myself sound older here, but like than sort of my elder millennial generation has done, where I think we're trying to play within the system a little bit more. When I think about how sort of sweeping generalizations here, but when I think about how I and my peers show up in the vegan space, it's often kind of like, how can we assimilate and bring veganism to that, whereas I think there's a younger generation that are more, no, actually let's just rewrite the whole thing.
There's I was going to say, yeah, there's sort of, I think our generation is still, and I'm speaking sort of about my family, because that's where I see older generations, particularly over like, say, Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner. It's like they've been raised a certain way. They've been raised in a world that spoke a certain way and saw the world in a certain way. And I mean, I'm thinking like, back in the 50s, they really weren't a waste conscious, generation. That's not really what they're known for. They were kind of known for throwing fast food out the side of their, their Thunderbirds or whatever. Whereas like the younger generation, Gen Z, they're inheriting a different planet. Like they are literally inheriting a burdened planet that is burning. And that, not to sound too dire, but the future of the planet is very uncertain. And so they're a generation that is being forced to rethink the game, and things that prior generations thought was okay is not okay. I saw a fantastic interview the other day. It was Animal Rising that was talking on the news. And one of the things they said, it was an activist who was speaking up against the horse races that are happening right now. And I just thought it was very interesting. Yeah, it was very interesting because this activist was saying, we can't change the system overnight, but it's small changes that we put in place now that will create a world that's more sustainable in the future. And one of the things the reporter said, he looked at her and he said, well, if we don't use the animals this way, then what use are they to us? And I just thought that was just such a... that says everything, doesn't it, right? Because in other words, there is a certain generation that sees animals that if they can't exploit them, and if they can't eat them, and if they can't experiment on them, then what good are they to us? And if that's sort of where we've come as a species, that's very worrisome, because then it's really become a dominion, it really, really has. We're not sharing our planet by any means. We know we're not, but a lot of people don't even seem to think of it in any other way. I divert, sorry. I digress.
No, but I think no, I think it's perfectly relevant. You're spot on. I think that there is that definite sort of sense of time with generations. The younger generation is very aware of the impending nature, the current nature of climate crisis, as an example. And then, I think the way you point that out, what use is that to me? What use is that animal to me? That being to me is kind of that there's a seismic difference in that viewpoint versus sort of our viewpoint, and hopefully that of the generation, sort of the current Gen Z generation.
Hopefully.
Thinking about like fashion and turning our attention to that, when did kind of fashion become an ongoing concern for you, something that you were interested in, a passion, and kind of at what point did that overlap with your vegan journey, and did that kind of spark some, okay, well, I need to rethink some things?
So as I said, I'm an actor. So I've always been interested in fashion. I think that, I think to some extent, whether we know it or not, many of us are interested in fashion. It's so intrinsic to our lives. It's a form of social currency. It's how we express ourselves to our friends. Even if you're wearing like a t-shirt and jeans, it's a choice. It's a choice of how you choose to express yourself in the world around you. So to answer your question, I think I've always been interested in fashion. I've always, I've had the opportunity to dress for several events and red carpets, and I've always been interested in, making sure that I try to wear apparel that reflects the person that I want to be and the world that I want to create. And so where my interest, particularly in vegan fashion, actually started was, again, back to Vicki Lanolan, the executive producer of the show. She had been planning this show for several years before I jumped on board. I want to say that the inception of the show probably goes back to, pre-pandemic even, the planning initially of it. It was her brainchild. But she approached me and she said, do you know about the fact that, and a lot of people don't know this, the fashion industry, particularly for fabrics like leather, and for a surprising amount of fabrics that you wouldn't think of, often sources their fabrics from animal-based products. And if you actually delve deeper into the fashion industry, it is as barbaric as the meat industry. Often they utilize the exact same suppliers. And I didn't know that. I had no idea. A lot of people are very much unaware of that because, for the pure reason that the fashion industry doesn't want you to know. I mean, they want you to think of catwalks, and they want you to think of glamour, and they want you to think of, when you see those beautiful stiletto shoes, they don't want you to think of, the repulsive tanning floor that the actual skin came from, or the animal that got stunned in order to get that skin that is now on the shoe that you're wearing, and the blood that essentially was spilled to wear the product that you're wearing. So she introduced me to that side of things. And so once I got informed about that, again, linking to my activism background, I immediately was interested in getting on board because I do have a background in PR. I try to be as I try to utilize my ability to speak in whatever way I can to try to help the causes I dearly care about. And so when she offered me the chance to join as the host of the show to help raise awareness, not only for the vegan brands here in Toronto and globally, but also to raise awareness in our community about the vegan fashion industry and the fashion industry, I immediately jumped on board to do that. So that's how it began. And I highly recommend, if anyone wants to learn more about the practices at play in the fashion industry, there's a fantastic documentary. It's called Slay. And it's available on Waterbury. You can watch it for free. You can stream it for free. And it's directed by Rebecca Capelli. It's a fantastic documentary. It came out, I want to say, in 2022. But it's a fantastic resource. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. And an incredible film, and I think for many, if they can get a chance to watch it, it will be as seismic as some of the big ones that everyone talks about, Dominion. Huge. And What the Health and Game Changers and all those other ones, Cowspiracy. I think it's that big a thing. And actually, it's really interesting you talk about it because I was talking to another guest actually before I spoke to you, and we were talking about, for a future episode, we were talking about kind of the number of kind of omnivorous folks that are out there who are kind of starting to think, even if it's kind of purely climate change induced, they're starting to think about reducing their intake and so on, and that increasing. Certainly in the UK, that's fairly common. A fairly common conversation. Not for everybody, but lots of people talking about, reducing, and there's no meat Mondays and all these kind of different things. My little boy's school, for example, which is a very omnivorous school, is doing a no meat Monday soon.
Wonderful.
So on and so forth. And it's really interesting because I don't think the fashion element, and then you mentioned like the similarities between the meat industry and the fashion industry in terms of exploitation of animals, certainly in terms of scale and so on and so forth. I don't think there is the sort of the general public, if you like, are aware of that contribution at all. Leather is still very much a very commonly used product and so on. Do you think how far do you think we need to go in terms of that conversation with the kind of the wider population?
I think, as you touched on, I mean, there are so many industries that need this conversation. I think with fashion in particular, it's vital, especially because it is an industry that relies on this fragile reputation of beauty and glamour, and if you actually lift the curtain up, I think the voices right now that are very strongly advocating for certain fashion brands that are still holding on to fur and that are still holding on to leather, I think those voices would speak differently if they were empowered with all of the information. And, that's not to say that these industries can change overnight by any means, because there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to change. But I think it is an important conversation, one that, there are so many implications of it. Number one, first and foremost for the animals. There are so many lives that are being killed every second for items of clothing that are, quite frankly, people are wearing them on their back and they have no idea. They think that they are wearing something that was a byproduct, a discarded item from, say, the meat industry, when little do they know that the fashion industry in itself is a $1 trillion industry that is very motivated to kill, that is very motivated to do all of the same practices that the meat industry does as well. Also, if you look at the communities where a lot of these factories are located, where a lot of the fashion industry sources their core products from, it's destroying the communities where these factories are at play. There are diseases that are rife, cancers that are rife in these communities because of the biochemicals that these industries use in those communities. I mean, this conversation is so, there's so many layers and so many reasons why this industry needs a tighter lens focused on it. My thought is, I think it's really important. I'm so grateful that you have me here today, that we can actually have this conversation. And I hope that, a few people hear this and maybe will watch Slay, that they will look it up and that they will try to be more conscious consumers about where they're sourcing their materials. And, when I look in terms of the vegan fashion industry and where it's going, it is an innovative industry. There was a report that was issued it's called the Material Innovation Group. And what they do is every year they do a report on the upcoming innovative materials in the vegan industry, how they're rethinking the game. And it's just incredible. I mean, we have materials that are now being made of like mycelium. So mycelium's like fungi, materials that are being made from plants, recycled materials. You have materials like, we actually featured a few of them in our show, but, we have like berry stacks, which is, there's handbags and clothes being made out of strawberry waste right now. There are like pineapple waste, teak leather. There's so many innovative ways that we are rethinking the fashion industry in a way that, produces less greenhouse gases for our planet, doesn't kill anybody, doesn't take a life. And creates a more sustainable industry in the long run. So, I mean, I think it's such an important conversation. I think it really matters, and that's why I am passionate about it, and that's why I'm so excited. Like, I'm delighted to be part of this show, because for one night, it's a celebration. Not even one night, in the all year round, it's a source of awareness to let people know that there is an alternative option, and for one night, it is a celebration of all of those different things. I'm
intrigued that talking about the kind of leather conversation and the amount of innovation, like you say, within the vegan fashion space is just incredible, and going at a rate of knots, which is fantastic to see. But I'm intrigued as to like, if I think that the conversation around fur, as an example, and you mentioned like Vicky's work with Peter and so on. And they've been campaigning on that on that particular topic for years, and I think that's generally like seeped into the conscious of the mainstream. The mainstream view is fur equals bad. Like, I think that's generally like people have got that message and are fairly comfortable with that. If a high street shop, certainly in the UK, was selling fur, it would generally be talked about in less than positive terms. I'd say they're probably the exception to that, although I think that kind of changed quite quickly. But there was a winter where Canada Goose was very fashionable in the UK. There was also a lot of protests and so on, and they've got a central London store, and so that was getting that got a lot of people protesting. But there seems to be, and I wonder if it's, you touched upon it, because of this idea of it being a byproduct. Leather doesn't seem to have the same connection as fur when we're still talking about the skin of a living being, and that sort of baffles me a little bit, that we can be so far along the conversation with fur and so behind the conversation with leather, to the point where we're making all kinds of indiscriminate objects leather for no apparent reason, whether it's phone cases or you name it.
I think it comes down to cognitive dissonance. I think, that's a great question. I think it comes down to cognitive dissonance, truly. I think we as human beings, we're great at compartmentalization, and we're great at deciding what we mentally choose to accept as okay and what we choose to mentally not accept as okay. So, like you said, with fur, there was this big conversation, and there was a lot of coverage showing pictures. I think pictures are really powerful, and documentaries are really powerful. So there was a lot of content out there visually showing sort of the faces that were being impacted, and it really bothered people. But I think when it comes to leather, there is, a lot of very careful, I know in Slay they talk about this, but there is a lot of very careful language used in that industry to imply that it's a byproduct. So you're not hurting anybody. You're not hurting anybody. No one got hurt for this, say, jacket or pair of boots because it was just, it had passed away anyway. It was already used. It was already used for a steak dinner. So, what are we going to do with the skin? We might as well be efficient with it and use it. So I think that definitely plays a contributing factor to it. I think also it's, especially when the conversation about fur came up, oftentimes it's influencers, especially like in the fashion industry. That's why I think it's so important the conversation matters. When you have influencers in the fashion industry, voices that people look up to, that start to say, this is wrong, I won't support it, it's wrong, I will not endorse brands that do this. You have people that look up to these individuals that say, oh, okay, if this person doesn't endorse it, then maybe I should look a bit further. Maybe there's something I haven't seen. Whereas I think that starting with leather, it's certainly starting, but it's not there yet. And I mean, yeah, I think it's a conversation that needs to happen a lot more. And I think kind of like there's been several documentaries like Dominion out there that have showed the state of big agriculture, and like you said, like they're powerful. Like I would dare anybody to see Dominion and then go eat a burger. Like you just can't. It's horrendous. Once you see what those things are, you can't unsee them. Pardon me. Whereas I think there's less coverage of the fashion industry. Because they, like all these industries, they don't want it out there. They don't want you to know. And so my challenge to people would be, and especially this really fuels me. If you don't want me to see something, there's a reason why you don't want me to see it. And thus, I want to know what you're hiding so that I can then make my conscious choice as to whether it's something I want to support or not. And I would ask people, why do you think these industries are hiding what they do? If it is so ethical, why are they hiding what they do?
But there's definitely some similarities here, right, between the meat industry, the tobacco industry back in the day, and then using a lot of tactics to try and prolong their life, if you like, as they were sort of. And it feels the same in fashion. I don't know if I'm wrong, but I certainly feel like, I'll give you an example. I was looking at a press release from Mulberry a couple of years back, and it was, Mulberry have released their first kind of ecologically sustainable product and blah blah blah, and right down the way it said made from bovine leather, and I was kind of like, huh? So how is this? Which part of this is sustainable? And it just struck me as like a massive kind of greenwashing type of thing. They wanted to get the column inches and so on and so forth. And I can think of. I think this is more high street, but I can certainly think of some high street brands in the UK, slightly different. At least it is kind of vegan on the face of it, where they've taken a product they already sold, a plastic handbag, for example, and they've relabeled it as vegan because they're kind of trying to, but it's still got an ethical, an ecological footprint that is not particularly great, and so on. Although at least a life hasn't been taken. Although even then we could get into the kind of criteria of whether they, what allows them to put the word vegan on it, and how much about their supply chain they know, and all these kinds of things. Talking of that, I know it's a big old kind of ramble of a question, but greenwashing in the fashion industry, like how aware does the average consumer need to be of that kind of thing?
Good question. So I would say you're 100% right. There is a lot of use of buzz labels. I want to say it's kind of like you'd see in the grocery store where you see certain things that say certifiably sustainable. And you look at them and you're like, I'm thinking of like some of the cans of tuna that I've seen that say certifiably sustainable. There's no fish farms that are sustainable. In the fashion industry, certainly there will always be brands that try to take advantage of certain trends and try to label something that is accidentally vegan, or that try to, jump on a trend so that they can push a product further. My recommendation would be, I want to start by saying that, before I sort of like give any advice, I do want to say that, taking that first step is important. Even making the conscious choice to say, hey, I want to buy something that is sustainable and that is vegan and that is cruelty-free, you're already on the right track. And you're not always going to be, perfect, and you're not always going to buy a product that's 100% vegan, but as long as you buy a product that is not made from animal products, you're already not putting money in the pocket of that industry. So that's already a move in the right direction. You don't have to be perfect. But that being said, some of the steps that I've done to try to ensure that I do support brands that are, pushing us, moving us in the right direction, is I try always to look into, like if it's a brand, I will try to look into their process. Usually there's a page that says like our process, and you look at where are they sourcing their materials from, where are their suppliers from, as you said, are they using some kind of a like a leather-based product? Are they using an animal-derived product? Or, looking at their back-end processes and seeing, I always try to look for the PETA logo as well. I love like the PETA approved logo. I love that because I know that PETA is very thorough and they do their due diligence into looking at suppliers and looking at how brands source their materials. I always look for that. And a lot of really great vegan brands have that PETA approved logo. So if you do see that, that's like 100% a great step in the right direction. But I do want to say, particularly when it comes to fashion, the biggest step forward is to just not support products that are derived from animals, because the more that we as consumers make a stand and show designers and suppliers that we don't support that, that's how these industries die. I mean, really, you mentioned it with like the tobacco industry, like, it is very similar to the tobacco industry, and they are doing everything they possibly can to rebrand things and rephrase things, and marketing departments are hard at work to try to rephrase situations and make a product seem better. But as the consumer, you do your due diligence as best you can. And the only thing I would ask is to just not support animal-derived products, please.
Tell us a little bit about the vegan fashion show in terms of like the selection process. How do you come across these designers and so on and so forth, and compile such a sort of an amazing show?
So for me, full transparency, I'm the host. So basically my role is sort of coming in and sharing what's going on that day and raising awareness for the show itself. So the actual process itself, so our show, we had our first show last year in 2022. Basically, in terms of how anyone who's interested in being involved as a designer, we will post various applications on the Vegan Fashion Show website. So if anyone is interested in coming out as a volunteer, coming out as a designer, we will have an application form that people can submit to be considered. In terms of our designers, what we're looking for, and to be honest, it's the board that will make that decision. But oftentimes we're looking for brands that are, it goes without saying, vegan, cruelty-free, that are innovative, that reflect, the future that we want to see. And we have already announced 2 designers this year as well. One is a Toronto-based brand called the Wifey Collection, led by Nadia Abraham. It's a female and faith empowering brand. And we've also, there's Stefan Shen, who is the owner of QC Shen. He is a PETA award-winning designer as well. So we've announced 2 designers this year coming up. But we are still looking for more. So if there is anyone who's interested in getting involved, please do let us know. But it's going to be an amazing show. It's going to be bigger and better than it was last year. So if there is anyone who is interested in getting involved, we're going to have vendors, we're going to have a runway, catwalk like we did last year, food vendors, accessory vendors, all kinds of stuff, and performers as well. So it's going to be a great show.
What was the feedback like from the first one? How did it go?
It went really well. We sold out. So we sold out the entire hall. We raised $6,500 for Animal Justice, which is the organization leading the fight for animal rights here in Canada. We had Camille Lebchek, who is the executive director of Animal Justice. She came and spoke as well. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. I am absolutely delighted by this community and how supportive they are. And I think it just speaks to the fact that this city desperately wants this. People want to make an empowered decision. People love fashion and they want to do it, they want to enjoy it in a responsible way. And this show gives them the opportunity to do that and meet with like-minded individuals who care about the animals as well and support an amazing cause. So to answer your question, it was amazing. Honestly, I hoped it would be good, and it was even better than that. It was fantastic.
Where can you see it going from here? What's the trajectory of the vegan fashion show?
Oh, that's a great question. I think just, each year our goal is to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't want to speak for the entire team, but I will say that, at this point, conservatively, we're probably looking at a show that will be about 2 to 3 times bigger than we were last year. So just looking in terms of just getting more people able to enjoy the show, getting more designers who can show, and at the end of the day, our goal is to empower vegan fashion and empower designers, local designers, global designers. So that's sort of where we want it to go. And at the end of the day, the more vegan businesses that we can empower in this industry, the more market share they will have and the more awareness they will have. So that's sort of where the show is hoping to go. Bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah.
That's an aspect actually I don't know why it hadn't really occurred to me, but it's obvious now you say it, that a show like the Vegan Fashion Show gaining traction, gaining popularity, will not only be good for the show and good for the exposure of vegan fashion and therefore the whole industry, but could actually be a gateway to designers themselves in saying, well, actually that's an awesome event. I've been inspired by some of the things I've seen there. Maybe I want to design for that and be featured in that show. Are you seeing that already? I appreciate it's early days, but are you seeing some designers sort of who are saying, actually, do you know what? I hadn't really thought about the vegan design before, but maybe I need to go that way.
One piece of feedback I definitely had from the show is that we've had some vegan fashion designers who just needed their exposure, right? They needed to get their products on a catwalk. They needed people to see what they were capable of doing. And since then, they've had their work picked up by bigger outlets and by bigger sources. And that's amazing. For our team, we love to hear that because that is our goal. And, I want to say I haven't been individually approached by anyone that said that, they're inspired to necessarily start a brand or whatnot. But I have certainly been approached by vegan brands who, are just desperately looking for a platform. They're looking for their fashion show that is unique to what they can offer. And so we have definitely had a great amount of feedback from designers saying that they're interested in getting involved in the show, which is lovely to hear. So there is, it's a niche show, but it's one that I keep saying it, it's the fashion of the future. This show is the fashion for the future. This is where we're going. And one of the things I thought was really interesting in our show was we had this educational wall of textiles, and basically that wall showed the different types of materials that are coming out of vegan fashion. And it's just incredible because a lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't know the wide variety of an innovation that is happening in this industry. And so the fact that we've created this event that not only serves as you said, a source to empower vegan designers and a place where we can celebrate and raise awareness for vegan fashion and for the animals, and also raise support for animal justice, but we can also show people, the future of fashion and where we're going, and it is very hopeful. Despite the fact that, there is a lot of disparaging things happening in the industry. There is disparaging things happening in the industry, but there's a lot of hopeful innovation happening as well, which is fantastic.
Do you think there's scope for the the vegan fashion designers that you have, the smaller vegan fashion designers, independent labels, so on and so forth, who are kind of growing and developing through this kind of community, do you think they ultimately need to replace those big brands that exist in the world? Or do you think, and this is a very simplistic kind of view of things, but I'll put it out there anyway, or do you think there's actually we need to evoke a kind of change in the industry generally? So those, what I'm saying, I guess, is, are those big companies, do you think, capable of change based on what they're seeing from the sort of smaller independents and the rise of things like the vegan fashion show? And I can think of Immaculate Vegan over in the UK, the website and so on. Do you think those companies are capable of change, or do you think we ultimately need to eclipse them and remove them?
That's a great question. I think, I think that larger companies are capable. They're capable. I mean, we know that they are very capable of making changes in their supply chains if they need to. But I think what it comes down to is you follow the money. I mean, I've said this in other podcasts too, but I think that you have to follow the money. And I think that the shifts that we're seeing with smaller suppliers, the consumer choice, conscious choice to say, no, I don't want cruel fashion. I don't want it. I will not support it. And especially I'm so hopeful for Gen Z because they're a ballsy generation and they're not afraid to take an adamant stance. I think the more that future generations decide to consciously put their dollar in suppliers and in vendors and in stores that are making the choices that they ethically support, whether it is a small supplier. And I think, that's when the real change happens. I think that the smaller suppliers themselves, there is the opportunity, like I know we've seen with several of the brands that we've connected with, if there is enough interest from consumers, their line of brands can actually be picked up by the bigger brands. It can happen. We've seen it happen. It's just a matter of sort of showing that the dollar signs are there to interest the bigger brands, to carrying, the smaller brands, to giving them that wider exposure, to giving them sort of access to that mass market. It can happen. But again, when I think about the larger suppliers, for example, H&M, Zara, these big box stores that you'd see, in a big, if you're shopping at the mall, for example, oftentimes they have what they call their sustainable brands, or they'll have certain brands labeled as vegan. And I think they're closely monitoring how well they sell, because if they sell really strongly and if they perform well, I think that at the end of the day, we as consumers have to start driving this choice, because realistically, it's not going to be the stores that are going to make the change unless they have to. Industries rarely change because they wish to. They change because they have to adapt and survive. Yeah.
I guess there's, we talked about the tobacco industry. There's also a sort of a connection with the car industry, the automotive industry. I think of the change of language and all those kind of things like we talked about before, that's the sort of one of the things that's going on, that sort of the selling of hybrid cars and the branding of them as self-charging and things like that, when they've just got regenerative braking, which electric cars have anyway, but they're trying to sort of say, well, that's different. And then you have almost like the rise of a company like Tesla, whatever we think about the CEO's or owners' views. That's a different podcast.
Totally different.
But if we think about Tesla as an example, they've kind of disrupted that industry and forced some of those companies that would have ultimately stumbled along, blocking the progress of electric vehicles to now VW we've got to have a full range, and now Mercedes, we're now doing it, and Ford are doing
You're
it, and so on and so
100%
forth.
right. You have a big disruptor, right? It's often a big disruptor that changes the industry standard. I mean, yes, and I'm hopeful that we're not too far away from that. I'm really not. I think we're living in a world where a lot of our industries, they're all having to adapt and change, whether it's the food industry, whether it's the automotive industry, whether it's the fashion industry. We're moving in a direction where I don't think we can afford to keep going in the same direction. And so there is these disruptors that, and I'm hopeful that the fashion industry will have that as well. Truly. Yeah, that's a really great point. I can only think
of like Stella McCartney as like a big...
I was actually thinking Stella too, yeah.
Yeah, a big name one that sort of has done that. But then I was talking to Anik Ireland, who's the CEO of Immaculate Vegan, a website that sort of brings fashion, small brands, small fashion brands to the kind of UK and Europe market. I think they ship worldwide now, I'm not sure. But they'll collect these designers and put them on one website, and it's a great company. And we were talking about the fact that, you know, Stella McCartney is awesome, but serves almost like a very high-end market. You know, if you're buying a handbag from Stella McCartney, it's £500-600 plus, you know. And then, you know, even her collaboration with Adidas, you know, the Stan Smiths and so on, they're still like £200 trainers, whereas the regular Stan Smiths are like £55 or whatever. And so yeah, it sort of almost needs that kind of, and I guess Tesla's like similar, you know, they're not cheap cars, but they've not yet. They've started to, I suppose there's two things. One, I guess that trickles down to others, and I guess there's also, they start to then make a lower cost version of what they produce. I was going to say, I think they I mean, I don't want to speak too much about the automotive industry because that's not my specialty by any means, but I want to say, I think when they started, they were very high priced. And then now I believe they have like a more standardized vehicle, but it still isn't like, it's not an economy car. Like, it's not a very... You can tell I'm not a fashion guy, but...
You do have a cool hoodie, though. I like your hoodie.
I'm trying to find lots of analogies so I can compute things.
No, it's great.
The least fashionable person ever. But yeah, it's interesting. You know, when you talk about innovation and so on, there's so many parallels that are sort of firing off in my mind. You know, whether it's cars or so on. Technology is another one. Like, you know, that we start with the innovation, and the innovation is very expensive, and then as that becomes more
100%.
The technology is more democratized, then we start to see the price lower. And I guess it'll be the same in fashion, right? That we'll start to see
economies the expensive
of scale.
100%.
Yeah, the expensive high-end leathers will start to, you know, the mycelium leather or whatever is going to start to become a lower cost.
It will. And I want to say, like, a lot of the, you know, there is such a range. Like, I'm not sure if you've seen it. I know the PETA fashion page. I highly recommend that. It's like PETA's recommended fashion page. But there's a wide range of brands. Like, it's not exclusively, you know, there is certainly high-end brands for sure, but there's also more mainstream options as well that, you know, you don't have to spend, say, $200 on a handbag. Like, there are handbags that are vegan, that are beautiful, that are well-made, that you can probably get for, you know, between maybe $40 to $60, which is much more sort of in the range of what you pay, say, at Zara, you know, or at H&M for a handbag. So they do exist. They certainly do. I think it's just, you know, as a consumer being like, you know, I'm going to look at the label. Look at the label. What's it made out of? And actively avoid leather. And watch Slay. Watch it. Watch it. Yeah. Can't say it enough.
We'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, do it.
For folks who want to find out a little bit more, where do they go?
Yeah, no, for anyone who wants to know more, head to theveganfashionshow.org, and we have, this way, we actually have an online shop. We're building that out right now, but if anyone is interested, that's where we're featuring certain designers. If you're looking at you know, different vegan fashions, we have, we'll be doing a designer announcement on that page as well. Any upcoming details, tickets, all that kind of thing, definitely head to that page, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Angie. Thanks for all your time and indulging my uninformed fashion-based questions.
No.
I really appreciate it.
This was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. It was a treat.
Oh, it's been great. I definitely urge people to go over and check out the site as well. And for our Canadian listeners, you might even be able to go and visit the show, which would be awesome.
Please do. It'll be we'll be announcing the date shortly, but it will be in, you know, I want to say later fall 2023. The date will come very shortly. We'll be announcing it.
Awesome. Can't wait. Thanks so much, Angie.